So, to conclude this video, it's time to take you to court. Mr. Nolan, you stand here accused of not only theft, but wasting away the audience's goodwill with aspects of your confusing, non-linear time progression. How do you plead? Not talking, huh? That makes sense since you're just a PNG of his head. Very well. Until you can atone for your transgressions, I sentence you to director jail. You shall never work again due to the consequences of your previous film's failure. Take him away.
Are you watching closely?
Wait, did that disembodied PNG head just speak? Ooh, a map to treasure. Everybody wait here while I go pursue this.
A few inches later.
Alright, let's see what I can find. Huh? It can't be. That madman! What has he done?
Funding for Shaperless is provided by
Squarespace, the sponsor of today's video. It's the all-in-one platform for entrepreneurs to create beautiful websites, engage with their audience, and sell anything from products to content to time. So, let's talk about Academy Award winner Christopher Nolan. God, it feels good to say that. Nolan is a filmmaker I've respected for quite a while, because he's basically the perfect midpoint between a blockbuster filmmaker and a prestigious filmmaker. He's one of the most widely respected and popular directors across general audiences. I don't think your average Joe Schmo on the street knows the names of too many directors. But if you ask them who's the guy that made The Dark Knight, Inception, or Oppenheimer, they'll probably know that it was Christopher Nolan. And the cool thing about him is that not only are his movies popular, but in my opinion, most of them really have the substance to justify their insane commercial success. He proved to the world that superheroes could be taken somewhat seriously. He crafted some truly mind-bending and creative stories that got audiences thinking far more than your average blockbuster would. And now, he's finally achieved the recognition he's deserved for so long from the Academy. Now is as good a time as any to rank all of his films. Throughout the course of watching his entire back catalog, I honestly became an even bigger fan of his than I already was. The way he plays with time and non-linearity in his stories is so engaging. While not everything about his filmmaking style works for me, the parts that do work wonders. But on the other hand, he has made a couple stinkers in my opinion. So if you're a mega fan of his, I hope you'll bear with me, because it won't be long at all before we get to the really great stuff. With that said, why don't we jump on into it?
Disappointment in the game of life.
Alright, let's cut the shit. You know exactly what the bottom slot is. Tenet is not good. I hesitate to say it's an awful movie, even though I would certainly not argue with anyone who thinks that way. I just think it's a frustratingly mediocre and not well thought out film. Its central conceit of time moving backwards for certain objects and certain people just isn't nearly as engaging of a hook as Nolan thinks it is. It feels like this movie is trying to capture a similar vibe as Inception, telling this thrilling story and utilizing a unique sci-fi twist to enhance the tension. But not only is the sci-fi concept in Inception way easier to understand, but the stakes are more well defined and the central character has an engaging personal storyline. Nobody in Tenet has an engaging personal storyline of any kind. The closest thing would be Elizabeth Debicki's character caring about her son, but she's just kind of a standard abused damsel for most of the film. The protagonist, I'm sorry, I should probably use his actual name. The protagonist is an entirely unengaging character who I never felt had much stake in anything going on. I like John David Washington's performance, and while we're at it, Robert Pattinson is also good in this movie, but these characters don't really have traits to latch onto. They're just vessels to get from one action scene or expository conversation about how the time travel shit works to the next. It makes for a really boring movie. The action is kinda cool and the performances all work, but I had no investment in anything going on. An issue that was compounded as the film trudged along to its rather underwhelming climax. I should also say that this movie is not nearly as clever as it thinks it is. One of Christopher Nolan's best attributes as a storyteller is how he uses non-linear storytelling for cool dramatic reveals, as we'll see when we talk about the good movies on this list. But when your entire film is built around the concept of non-linear time progression, Well, yeah, I pretty much immediately guessed that the two guys the protagonist and Rob Pat were fighting were themselves. I immediately guessed that the lady Elizabeth Debicki saw jumping off the boat was herself. Literally anything else would have been more shocking and subversive. In general, while I can admire how ambitious this movie was in theory, in execution, I think it might be Christopher Nolan's most pedestrian film to date. Hidden behind all the pseudo-cleverness is an incredibly standard story with undercooked characters that I have no desire to ever watch again. The only time any bit of dialogue in this film made me perk up was when they mentioned Oppenheimer, because that made me say, oh shit, I could be watching that movie instead. Don't watch Tenet, you are not missing out on anything. I should take Christopher Nolan to court for wasting away the audience's goodwill with his confusing, non-linear time progression. But I'm not gonna do that. He's made good movies with non-linear progression before. I'll talk about them soon. But first, we gotta cover his other biggest failure.
You're a big guy.
So I grew up watching Chris Stuckman's reviews, and I remember he had a certain term called phantom menacing, where you're anticipating a movie more than anything. You're just so hyped for it. And then you see it, and it wasn't that good. But you just try and convince yourself that it was, so you don't have to submit to the overwhelming disappointment. To this day, I've only done this phantom menacing technique with one film, and that is The Dark Knight Rises. I was 14 and coming off the insane 4-year Dark Knight hype. A movie that amazing just had to have an even better follow-up, right? So I saw it with my family opening weekend, and, yeah, it was fantastic. Why do you ask? It made sense. It wasn't horribly stupid and contrived. Nolan's a visionary, damn it. Yeah, as much as I didn't want to admit it, there is too much working against this movie for me to call it good. And to be fair, there are a lot of good elements. It's not awful. But as the years went on, its problems became more and more apparent to me. I mean, a lot of online reviewers pointed them out for me as well. But enough of all this, that's a cute opinion, did a YouTuber give it to you stuff. I'm my own YouTuber, and it's been ages since I've seen this film. So I went into it with an open mind, free of anyone else's opinion influencing me. Except Cosmonaut Marcus, since his video just came out, and damn, it made some good points. But whatever, I still have my own reasons for disliking this film, and let's get into it. Just as a reminder, this is an official disclaimer that you can enjoy this film and my takes on it are just from my perspective, and you should not decide to dislike it based on anyone else's takes unless you thoroughly think their take through and decide that you agree with it based on your own standards for judging films. Back to the video. I think the biggest problem with this film is that I just never felt threatened by Bane. His plan to enact martial law in Gotham before blowing it up 5 months later with a nuclear bomb is just really roundabout and stupid, but at least he has an intimidating presence.
For you.
Oh no, oh dear. Look, I can live with Batman's ridiculous voice, but like, who thought this was intimidating?
The fire rises.
I'm sorry, that is the goofiest shit. He's not an awful villain or anything. He has some effective moments of physical violence, and to his credit, he does bring the city to its knees, adding some stakes to the final film of this trilogy. But it really is so hard to take him seriously. And I think this problem is especially compounded by the twist villain reveal. Yes, this movie came out 1 year before Frozen, and it kinda has an equally bad twist villain as Hans, Callaghan, and Bellwether. Something was in the water during this era, I'm telling you. As soon as Talia, a character we barely know anything about, is revealed to be the true mastermind behind this plot, the main villain we've been building up for 2.5 hours is kinda just disposed of within the narrative. He's completely subservient to her whims, and then after like a minute, Catwoman just shows up and shoots him. That was the death scene of the main villain of this movie. He's just picked off like he was any old henchman. Oh well, at least Talia's will be better. Oh. Truth be told, I can't even begin to understand her motivation for wanting to destroy Gotham. Oh, I hated my father, but then you killed him, Batman, and I was like, hey, you know what? He made some good points actually. Let me adopt his entire ideology and destroy this city with a nuclear bomb. By the way, am I stupid, or is the bomb not far enough away from the city when it detonates? Like, wouldn't this cause radiation damage or something? Come on, Nolan, you made Oppenheimer 11 years after this movie. You should know this. I also hate how the movie has a really good setup with Bane finding Jim Gordon's speech, unmasking the true nature of Harvey Dent. And then it just doesn't show the impact of that. Bane is like, aha, Gotham, your peace is predicated on lies. Harvey Dent was evil and shit. And then we don't see any citizens' reaction to this news. I mean, I guess they do have bigger things to worry about, but given how much this movie presents Dent's reputation as this shining beacon of hope for the city that completely wiped out organized crime somehow, surely they would be a little horrified to know that it was all a lie. The speech does at least serve as Bane's justification for freeing all the criminals imprisoned without parole under the Dent Act. But I hate when movies do this with their villains. It's like, hey, wait a minute, these people went 8 years without parole? We don't really know what their crimes were, but surely some of them deserve parole hearings, right? Keeping all of them permanently locked up in the name of Harvey Dent's fake reputation is really messed up, and Bane has a point that this is an injustice. But he also kills people and he's gonna blow up the city with a bomb, so who cares what his thoughts on prison reform are? Beat him up, Batman! Speaking of which, I just think it's really funny how little Batman there is in this movie. He's in about 30 minutes of the 2-hour and 44-minute runtime. But to be fair, this is because he spent the past 8 years moping about Rachel's death. 8 years, my guy. And need I remind you that the last time he lost people really close to him, he channeled that rage into becoming a crime-fighting vigilante? But to be fair again, apparently there's been no major crime in the last 8 years, so I guess it's fine. So 45 minutes into this movie, we finally get our first glimpse of Batman, and it's very underwhelming. There really isn't a single action scene in this film that lives up to the previous two, which sucks, because some good action probably could have helped make up for how childish and simplistic the plot is. Every available cop in the sewers, every single one, you sent thousands of them down there and never once considered that this could be a trap? Alright, I'm sure you've probably heard every critique known to man about this movie, and we got a lot of actually good movies to cover in this vid, so let me wrap up with some stuff I like, because this really isn't the worst movie in the world. I liked Cillian Murphy being a silly little judge. I like when Batman and Catwoman team up for fights, wish we got more of those. Everyone's performances are good, and I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's, especially when he goes to Wayne Manor to appeal to Bruce. I like the stuff in the prison hole and Bruce finding his resolve to get out of there. The football scene was cool. In spite of his goofy voice, Bane has some pretty cool lines, like this one.
And Gotham is ashes. Then you have my permission to die.
But when Batman brings that back in the final battle,
Tell me where the trigger is. Then you have my permission to die.
that's the rawest line in the entire movie. Maybe even the entire trilogy. I swear there were other things I liked, just let me think. I like that the plot ties back to Batman Begins in some admittedly really stupid ways, but it's cool at the very least that the conclusion to the trilogy didn't ignore the largely overshadowed first chapter. It's watchable. It's aggressively long and drawn out and not particularly well paced, but most scenes in a vacuum are pretty solid as long as you don't think about the logistics of the plot and all the stupid shit. I don't know, that's all I got. It's really disappointing that Nolan didn't stick the landing with this trilogy, but fortunately, I don't think it undervalues the previous two films at all. You could just end the story on a dark note with The Dark Knight. You kinda don't need this one in order to get closure. But to be totally fair, once the stupid plot is resolved, I do kinda like the epilogue this movie gives to Bruce Wayne. As long as you ignore the logistics of nobody in the entire world being able to recognize this famous billionaire. You see what I mean when I say it's hard to like this movie?
We're going to war!
So I feel like this is gonna be my only real hot take of this video. And I'm gonna make it even hotter. I don't like Dunkirk at all. To the point where I'd honestly call it my least favorite Christopher Nolan film. You know how in some of my rankings I designate that a movie is my favorite, even if it doesn't rank first place, because there are some movies that I just think are critically better? Dunkirk is the exact opposite for me. Critically, it does not have the same level of flaws as Tenet or The Dark Knight Rises. But I personally enjoyed watching those two more solely because, as I've stated numerous times, I just cannot stand war movies. It's a personal preference thing I cannot overcome. There are exceptions, like Saving Private Ryan, obviously. Plus 1917 was cool, mainly because of the single shot gimmick, and I could get invested in the two characters it chose to focus on. But most of the time, these types of films are cinematic white noise to me, that don't say anything other than war is hell. Dunkirk was actually the movie that made me realize I don't like war films back when I watched it for the 2017 Oscar season. I thought maybe it would click with me on rewatch. And like, I guess I have some compliments. The Hans Zimmer score in this is really exceptional and heightens the dread and urgency extremely well. The cinematography is gorgeous, particularly in the flying scenes. I like the stuff on the little boat with the Banshees of Inisherin kid and the BFG, and it becomes especially more gripping when Cillian Murphy comes aboard and we see him grapple with his PTSD. It's an extremely well-made movie. It's hard to argue against that. But it is just not my thing, and I could not get invested in most of what was going on. Again, it is possible for me to enjoy a war film, but with those two examples I listed, Saving Private Ryan and 1917, the reasons I got so into them was because I cared about the characters, and because the craft of the film was so strong. The former had the most gripping war sequence ever put on film, and the latter had the cool single shot thing going on. Dunkirk is a well-directed movie, but I couldn't latch on to any of the characters outside of some mild investment in what was going on the boat. I don't want to dismiss what is obviously a very well-made movie for what it is. It's just the fact that it does not appeal to me, and that's totally fine. You can always make your own list where Dunkirk ranks near the top. If you're a fan of war movies, I think you will get something out of this. It is good by the war movie standard. Its low ranking on here is simply due to my own personal preference. I cannot stress that enough. Christopher Nolan did a good job with this movie. I would just personally sooner rewatch any of his other films before this. Yes, even Tenet, because then I can at least laugh at the funny "I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago" line. Christopher, you don't order hot sauce, you fucking moron.
Why are you following me?
Following is the first feature film Nolan ever directed, and yeah, you can kinda tell. It has a lot of his hallmarks, like a prominent use of the score to drive emotions in scenes, and a lot of events being shown in a non-linear fashion to make certain reveals hit harder. But it doesn't nearly have the same filmmaking finesse as a lot of his future movies. The story is pretty interesting, but both that and the characters aren't nearly as fleshed out as they could be, considering the film is only 69 minutes. This is more of a proof of concept that he's onto something with some of these filmmaking techniques and storytelling styles. It's impressive for a movie filmed on a shoestring budget that only made use of natural light since he couldn't afford any professional lighting equipment, but I think I admire its production more than I actually enjoy it as a film. It's got an interesting story, like I said, and some bits of engaging dialogue, but overall, it's just kind of okay. Cool piece of history to trace an insanely impressive career from, not much else.
It feels like somebody
Wants to sell me something!
I told you he was on to us.
I need some sleep.
The first thing that really struck me as fascinating about Insomnia was when the opening credits informed me that Christopher Nolan did not write this film. I didn't actually know there were any movies where this was the case, so I paused the film to look it up, and yeah, this is the only film Christopher Nolan directed but didn't write. And watching it, you can definitely tell because the story is told in chronological order, and there's a woman with agency and plot relevance who doesn't die. It's pretty fascinating seeing him tackle someone else's script, and for the first hour or so, I was really gripped by it. Al Pacino plays a cop investigating a murder, and it's all pretty straightforward until the twist comes 30 minutes in. I won't say what it is, but man, I didn't see it coming, and my mind started racing thinking of where this movie was gonna go. Was the first 30 minutes just kind of a red herring, and this is what the real focus of the film is? Well, no, they kind of combine the two plot lines, and you know, it's not bad, it's pretty interesting on paper, but I felt like the execution left a lot to be desired. To be frank, this isn't Nolan's best work directing-wise. Hell, I think it's even a step behind his previous film, Memento. I really like how this is set in Alaska during a time where the sun never goes down. A perfect visual metaphor for Al Pacino's Insomnia. But I feel like there could have been more creative directorial ways to show that he's losing his mind from lack of sleep. We only start to get that in the last 15 minutes of the movie, when they could have spiced up a lot more of the second half. I also cannot stand the way this is edited. Like, the action and chase sequences just have so many quick cuts, and it just kind of feels disorienting and unprofessional. And my last major issue is the fact that while I really like the performances of Pacino and Hilary Swank, I'm sorry, I just can't take Robin Williams seriously as the killer. I mean, it's Robin Williams. I'm all for actors playing against type and surprising you with what they can do with a performance, but nothing about this one surprised me. I was never intimidated by him. I just kept thinking, oh hey, that's Robin Williams. He talks in a funny way. I just could not picture him doing the murder he described. I'm sorry. I don't know if that's just a me problem, and I'm sure he did plenty of other great dramatic roles, but this just did not work for me, and it kinda hampered a lot of the second half of the film. With that said, the first half before they meet is pretty airtight and engaging. Well, aside from the quick editing, but that becomes more prevalent in the second half. Overall, I'd say the pros and cons balance this movie out to be pretty great, actually. It's very un-Nolan in a lot of ways, and it's probably one of his least talked about films. But I think it's very underrated. It's got a really intriguing story, and 2 out of 3 great lead performances. So yeah, I'd very much recommend it.
Yeah. I'm man.
I feel like a lot of people just don't really know what to do with Batman Begins nowadays. I mean, it's kind of just known as the precursor to The Dark Knight, because that movie has hardcore overshadowed everything about this one. Hell, The Dark Knight Rises has hardcore overshadowed it as well, for the wrong reasons mostly. It just feels like whenever people talk about the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole, the discussion almost always centers on the last 2. There's not a whole lot to say about the first one, and I have to admit, I subscribed to this way of thinking for a while there. You see, growing up, I loved Arkham City. I played it on the Wii U because I didn't own a non-Nintendo system till I was like 20. This game was simply the coolest shit. And I watched YouTube playthroughs of the game that preceded it, Arkham Asylum, just to get an idea of what the story was before I jumped into the masterpiece sequel everyone was obsessing over. Finally though, once I grew up and stopped being a Nintendo baby and got a PlayStation like a real man, I figured, what the hell, let's actually play Arkham Asylum now. And I just couldn't get into it. It was just a weaker Arkham City. My entire playthrough, I kept thinking, why am I not just playing Arkham City now? That's the downside with really good sequels. Sometimes they're just so good that they completely overshadow their predecessor and don't give you a reason to revisit it. And that's exactly how I felt about Batman Begins throughout pretty much my entire life. I saw it as a kid in the midst of the Dark Knight craze sweeping the nation, but I never felt any real desire to rewatch it. Because, like, The Dark Knight is just this, but better. Why do I need to go back to it? So with all that said, finally revisiting it all these years later, I think this movie is incredibly slept on. You obviously can't call it one of Nolan's all-time best since The Dark Knight exists, but I think because of that movie, Batman Begins is one of Nolan's most underrated works. It's just a cool, solid as hell origin story that adapts nearly everything about Batman to the real world. You gotta remember, this was pretty much the first wholly serious film adaptation of Batman to ever exist. Well, I say wholly serious, but there's still a lot of pretty silly moments in this. I guess what I mean is that this is the first one that's trying to be serious. It's trying to take place in reality. It's saying, hey, here's how Batman would work in a serious setting. And I think it really pays off. They take their time building up every aspect of him, from his initial origin to him using his fear of bats against his enemies to every gadget he's known for. It makes for such a cathartic feeling when we finally see him all suited up an hour in. I also think the story is pretty strong, and I love the way all the pieces for the final battle are strung across the film's entire runtime. Bruce getting trained by Ra's al Ghul and then denying him his chance to destroy Gotham is seemingly wrapped up in the first act. But surprise, he's the big bad orchestrating everything in the third act. It's a good twist that works because we set him up already. He's absent for a lot of the film, but we don't need to establish his villainous persona out of nowhere at the end. We get it. We know him already. I love when movies have good twist villains. It makes me feel alive. This movie also has a lot more quips and silly moments than I remember. And you know what? I like that. It doesn't take itself as seriously as our public perception of the Dark Knight trilogy would suggest. This one is occasionally goofy, and I think it mostly works and doesn't destroy the realistic tone. I actually really like Katie Holmes as Rachel in this. I don't know, maybe this is weird to say, but she's just kind of adorable in this role. Like, it doesn't feel like she fits this no-nonsense DA role very much, but that's so endearing. I just really like it. Speaking of adorable and endearing characters, oh, Cillian Murphy, I'm so sorry I mispronounced your name in my Oppenheimer review. I will never atone for this. I love this guy as Scarecrow. He's just a silly, goofy man. Look at his face. He's a goofy goober and I love him, oh my god. Michael Caine is fantastic as Alfred. Morgan Freeman is Morgan Freeman. Enough said, I think. And Christian Bale is really compelling as Bruce Wayne in this. I had trouble taking him seriously whenever he wore a suit because it's literally just Patrick Bateman. I'm sorry, that's all I see. But I really liked his desire to bring justice to Gotham and his struggle to become a symbol for the city. I also like how Batman feels inexperienced in this. Hell, he doesn't even have a consistent voice half the time, and that kind of makes sense. He hasn't perfected the persona yet. Overall, I think this is a really great film, though not a perfect one. Much like Insomnia, I think the editing is just not very good, and it makes a lot of the fight scenes incoherent. I also think the entire chase scene with the police was pretty pointless. Like, why wouldn't Batman just bring the antidote with him in the car instead of just leaving it at home? Is he stupid? But overall, I think the film is wonderful. A good-ass time. One with a very different story and set of goals than The Dark Knight. And as a result, I don't think it deserves to be in its shadow. It's an amazing origin story for the character, and an important stepping stone for Nolan's career. I think it deserves more credit as its own great film, rather than just being the one he made before The Dark Knight. It's great, I really like it, moving on. Okay, we're halfway through. Time for a goofy skit that transitions into the sponsorship portion. Batman, it's me, Bane.
Curse you, Bane. You're garbage that kills for money.
That is where you are wrong, Batman. I run a reputable chiropractic business for money. And do you know what I used to make a website for my business?
Let me guess. Squarespace.
Aha! That is where you are wrong, Batman! I use Square- Oh, yeah, actually, you got it in one. Good job. Yeah, I used Squarespace. Squarespace is an amazing online website builder that enables you to create beautiful websites for your business or personal hobby. Start a completely personalized website with the new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. There are so many professionally curated layout and styling options you can use to craft a unique online presence tailored to your brand or business, and optimized for every device. Easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated, optimized SEO tools, so you show up more often to more people and grow the way you want. Running a business is so easy with Squarespace thanks to their simple but powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay. And in eligible countries, offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. These seamless checkout options allow you to easily sell exclusive content on your site. And so does the ability to add a paywall to sell memberships or courses, or sell files your customers can download, like PDFs, music, or ebooks. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ShayFrillis to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
I'm not in a dream, it's in a dream, it's in a dream, right?
If The Dark Knight is the movie that made Nolan a superstar filmmaker, Inception is the movie that cemented him as a legend. Everyone, from average moviegoers to cinephiles, was talking about this movie when it came out. Its awesome, mind-boggling premise, stellar execution in both its direction and editing, and instantly iconic score that resulted in countless memes about the Hans Zimmer. It was Nolan's first film to be nominated for Best Picture. And while it didn't win, that's perfectly understandable since it had a ton of competition. Black Swan, True Grit, Toy Story 3, The Social Network. It was a pretty stacked lineup to say the least. Huh. All these movies lost too. I wonder who the actual winner was. The King's Speech?
Who?
Well, whatever. Even though the Academy deemed Inception to be not as good as a boring, stuffy, completely forgotten movie from the director who would go on to make Cats 2019, I think Inception is pretty neat, and that's all that matters. I almost don't really know what to say about it, cause like, everyone's talked about it in incredible detail, and its best attribute is pretty obvious. It's just a really cool premise. Which is maybe a little similar to Satoshi Kon's Paprika, but let's not worry about that. Speaking of this movie being incredibly similar to a Japanese work, Inception is about infiltrating people's subconscious in order to steal things and change their minds, while also coming across cognitive versions of people that person knows in the real world. Suspicious. I'm on to you, Atlas, you hack frauds. You owe Christopher Nolan an apology. Anyway, yeah, I love heist movies, and this is a heist movie on Adderall. Each layer added makes the story way more enticing to follow, and it's really a mark of some tremendous editing that the story is even possible to follow with all this going on. Good job, Lee Smith, you edited the movie real good. The story is also great at introducing new stakes. Like, out of all the guys that get shot in the first layer, it had to be the one Leo needs to make a phone call and get him back to the United States. Oppenheimer just had to have super secret mental training to defend his subconscious. The feats these guys have to accomplish to make the plan work get increasingly more and more insane as the film goes on, and it just leaves you on the edge of your seat. I also think the story with Leo and his wife is really compelling and a solid emotional hook in the midst of all this craziness. However, the movie isn't exactly as perfect as I remember it being when I was 13. I kind of find a lot of the supporting characters in this to be a bit half-baked and unmemorable. Like, Tom Hardy's character is kinda funny, but not really. I think Elliot Page's character is a good anchor for Leo's emotional journey, but not really much of a character outside of that. Leo and Cillian Murphy's characters are the only ones I feel like I really learn much about. And like, is a lack of character for the team in a heist movie really that big a deal? No, not really. But we spend a lot of time with them, so I do wish they were more distinct. I also think we really take our time to get to the heist. Which is fair, we gotta explain the whole concept of incepting and whatnot, but there's still a lot in the first hour that feels like it doesn't need to be here. Like, the whole chase scene in Mombasa kinda felt like a studio-mandated action sequence since we can't let the audience get bored. But once the heist does get going, it's pretty incredible, and I ultimately can't complain about that much else. It's not among my all-time favorite Nolan works anymore, but it's still like a 9 out of 10. This dude's filmography is stacked. Oh, and since so much of the discussion surrounding this movie involves its ambiguous ending, without spoiling anything, I'm gonna give my take on it. Yeah, I think the top falls over. I mean, like, why wouldn't it? But why did Nolan cut the scene before showing that? Is it to stir up discussion among the general populace about the ambiguity of this film's conclusion? Nah, see, I think it was because he ran out of film to make the movie because he spent it all on the special effects, so there was no more film to show the top falling over. But hey, that's just a...
This is the magic trick, huh?
Illusion, Michael.
I never got around to checking it out until now, but I was always very interested in The Prestige. All I knew was that it centered around an intense rivalry between two magicians. And like, that just sounds really fun. After watching it, yes, I can confirm this is a very fun movie. Hate to sound like a broken record, but once again, the non-linear storytelling works wonders in terms of feeding you information and allowing Nolan to wow you with the trick later on. This isn't a spoiler because it's the beginning of the movie, but we start out with Christian Bale drowning Hugh Jackman before we flash all the way back to show how their feud escalated to this point. But having just seen Memento, I knew this couldn't be it. There was absolutely more to this that Nolan wasn't telling me. So I remained invested the whole time as I tried to piece out clues in order to figure out what trick Hugh Jackman would eventually pull and how he was gonna do it. And the answer was pretty wacky. It wasn't what I was expecting, but that's cool. Even if it has no basis in reality, the movie makes you believe it could happen within this reality. On top of that, the opening establishes that Christian Bale has a daughter with no one to look after her, immediately making you wonder where her mother is. And watching the scenes with that character in the past, you assume Hugh Jackman is gonna make her disappear at some point, based on what happened earlier. But then, your expectations are subverted. And with a lot of the knowledge you acquire in the ending, you start to realize, damn, Christian Bale's character is really f***ed up for not being more open with his wife about what's going on. And Hugh Jackman's character is really f***ed up for... well, I tell you, but I don't want to give away the trick. The entire movie is just watching these two depraved men become more and more insane in the pursuit of their art and the pursuit of ruining the other. It's fairly simple, at least by Nolan standards, but man is it riveting the whole way through. I'm very excited to rewatch this knowing how Christian Bale's final trick works. Plus in general, it's just a great time. It doesn't quite hit the same mind-blowing heights as some of Nolan's most iconic works. Plus I think the Scarlett Johansson character is really underwritten, and I would have loved to see her fall for Bale on screen instead of just telling us she fell for him. Wow, an underwritten woman in a Nolan movie? I'm shocked. But for the most part, a damn fantastic film. What other movie can make the claim that they have David Bowie playing Nikola Tesla? Name a single other movie with David Bowie as Nikola Tesla, or else I will have Hugh Jackman show up to your magic show with a gun and shoot you.
I can feel time
One consistent thing across Christopher Nolan's filmography is the fact that his movies do not aim to make you cry. Now that's totally fine. His specialty is obviously impressing you with the scope of his visuals and the elaborate ways he uses the concept of time to enhance his plots and the reveals within them. But what if I told you he made a movie that not only accomplished both of those things, but also managed to tell an absolutely devastating story about the power of love, family, and human connection that transcends the boundaries of time and space? I mean, you probably already know about it, right? Interstellar is one of Christopher Nolan's most popular movies, and I've seen a lot of mixed opinions about it through the years. Hell, my own opinion on it was pretty mixed. I saw it when I was 16, I thought it was good but not great, and I never checked it out again until this ranking. And I don't know what it is about this rewatch, but I was kind of floored almost the whole way through by it. It's pretty much the only Christopher Nolan film where the emotional core takes center stage. He usually uses the connection to and loss of a loved one as a jumping off point for his main character's motivations. The loss of his wife motivates Leonard Shelby. The loss of his life and inability to see his kids motivates Dom Cobb. The loss of Rachel motivates Bruce Wayne to just sit at home for 8 years. 8 fucking years. Bro, are you serious? Who wrote this shit? But while these motivations and tragedies are there, they typically aren't the focus of their films. Interstellar is Nolan's first truly emotion-driven piece. Everything ties back to the relationship between Coop and Murph, separated across time and space. The first act perfectly establishes their connection and the betrayal Murph feels when her father chooses to leave her in order to try and secure a future for her. Oh, and also he has a son. I actually think it's kind of funny how much less he cares about seeing his son again. But it stings every single time Murph expresses how much her dad didn't care about her, or assumes he left her on Earth to die. There's that moment towards the middle that just makes me sob where Coop watches the video logs of his now grown children, unable to communicate with them because time has literally slipped away from him. And then of course, there's the catharsis of the ending, which I guess if you haven't seen this movie yet, I won't go too deep into, but wow is it worth getting to. The powerful elements of the story, of course, are only one piece of the puzzle here. This also contains what are bar none the best visuals of Christopher Nolan's career. Absolutely vivid and breathtaking images of space. The way they bend and contort in such beautiful ways. I don't think it's a stretch to call this visual poetry. And they pair so nicely with Hans Zimmer's simultaneously elegant and intense score. I was just in awe during numerous sequences throughout this film, and I so thoroughly regret that I didn't see this in IMAX when it came out. I don't like to judge a film by the standards of it needs to be seen in a theater to get the full experience, because like, a film should be good no matter where you watch it. But watching this film at home, I was completely floored by the visuals, so I can only imagine how stunning it would have been on an IMAX screen. For about an hour and a half there, I was pretty much on board with everything going on. The story, the characters, the performances. Hell, Matthew McConaughey gave a better performance in this movie than whatever he won the Oscar for the previous year that should have gone to Leo in Wolf of Wall Street. Everything was pretty much perfect for a while there. But then there's Dr. Mann. This character is where the movie kind of lost me a bit, and I feel like I wouldn't have as many problems with him if he was just named anything else. This is kind of the natural endpoint of some of Nolan's unsubtleties as a filmmaker. Having the guy who represents selfishness and betrayal just be named Man. But on top of that, he's just kind of an underwhelming antagonist. I mean, the guy is just a complete idiot, not thinking of a better way to dispose of Coop, trying to dock anyway even though he doesn't know how. He's just kind of a pathetic roadblock we have to deal with before we get to the actual climax in the Tesseract. And I just feel like a scientist and astronaut like him wouldn't act this dumb. He might have gone insane from being alone for so long, but he seems pretty normal and well adjusted very quickly after they wake him up. So I don't know, I just don't like him that much as a character. A lot of folks take issue with the ending in the Tesseract, and like, yeah, it's not amazing. It kind of takes a pretty big leap in terms of believability, which I know is a weird thing to say about a sci-fi movie, but Nolan telling you, oh yeah, fifth dimensional beings from the future built this thing so Matthew McConaughey could explain the mechanics of a black hole through Morse code in his watch. much. You really have to trust that these entities you never see are out there divinely intervening to make the plot work. And I suppose I can believe that, but it doesn't necessarily feel as natural as everything else in this film. But I will admit, it might be kind of corny, but I do like the fact that love is the quantifiable thing that allows Coop to reach Murph. I think it kind of ties the themes of the film together, and it's really sweet. I don't know, don't judge me. Interstellar isn't gonna be everybody's cup of tea. I imagine some people don't think its colder sci-fi elements really mesh well with the sentimental human story at its center. A lot of people have compared this film to 2001: A Space Odyssey for obvious reasons. But to me, strictly in terms of tone, it makes me think a lot more of AI, artificial intelligence. I can overlook its flaws because at the end of the day, the warm and powerful emotion present amidst such a cold and bleak premise is simply too engaging to ignore. I love Interstellar wholeheartedly, and it took a rewatch to come to that conclusion, to let go of my skepticism and simply allow myself to be taken in by a visual masterwork with a beautiful story of a father and daughter, separated but not apart, working together to save humanity. Simply fantastic in every sense of the word. But you tell Dr. Man he'll never eat lunch on this planet again.
My bomb. They killed people.
He does not fucking say that!
And may I see Oppenheimer?
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Yes,
Best Picture, baby! It's honestly not hard to see why this is the first of Nolan's films to be a major awards darling. It's his first film to be based on a singular real person, one of the most important people of the 20th century at that. And yet, despite the fact that Nolan has to adhere to history and not make up something from scratch, that doesn't stop him from employing his usual non-linear storytelling techniques to amazing effect. This movie simply would not be as interesting if everything was told chronologically. If we didn't get that back and forth between Oppie building the bomb and getting grilled for his communist sympathies in the present day. And like I alluded to in my initial review, this structure makes for such an engaging reveal when it turned out Strauss organized the entire hearing out of petty revenge. Speaking of reveals related to the hearing, I love how you spend so much of the 3-hour runtime asking yourself, why is he being subjected to this? Which transitions into, why is he subjecting himself to this once you realize he's just renewing his security clearance and he doesn't need to. And then, a single line in the ending recontextualizes everything you just watched.
Did you think that if you let them tar and feather you, then the world would forgive you?
Shit, man. What a perfect way of reflecting Oppenheimer's coping mechanism with what he's done. Even after Truman morally let him off the hook, he can't wash his hands of his involvement in this atrocity unless the government publicly disavows him. And was it worth it? No, man, Kitty was right. Building the most horrific weapon in the history of the world is an unforgivable sin. And even though the last scene of this film takes place before the hearing chronologically, I think in this moment, he knows his actions cannot be undone. He destroyed the world, and Einstein is pissed. What an amazing ending. And that's on top of the sheer number of other amazing scenes in this. Strauss's meltdown, Oppenheimer's hallucinations, the Truman scene, Kitty clapping back against Roger Robb, the discussion on where to drop the bomb, and perhaps the best directed scene in Nolan's entire career, the Trinity test. Unreal. I was shaking in my seat in the theater during that shit. Time and time again, you get the impression that this is the most significant and important film Nolan has ever made. The subject matter plays a large role in that, but the execution is what really seals the deal in that regard. The entire film is coated with intense, quick cuts to atomic concepts racing through Oppie's brain, and Ludwig Göransson's masterful, ever-present score that enhances the dread of every scene it plays over. I also feel as if I haven't given Cillian Murphy the praise he deserves for this performance any other time I've talked about it. He's unbelievable in this, perfectly transitioning from a cocky, arrogant genius during the first half into the emotional wreck he becomes later on. You simply can't look away from his performance. He commands the screen in every scene he's in. What a truly exceptional film in so many ways. Plus, they even let Josh Peck be the one to hit the button for the bomb. I'm sorry, I'm not over that. How did he get into this movie? I saw someone say that he has great 1940s face, and I agree. Okay, so you're probably wondering why this movie doesn't top this list, or my best of 2023 list. Well, as amazing as so many moments of this movie are, I am of the opinion that overall, the film is a little too long. I'm not opposed to longness. For example, I don't think there's anything you should cut or trim from Killers of the Flower Moon, and that's longer than this. But I feel like some stretches of Oppenheimer could have been trimmed. When they're in the process of building the bomb itself, I didn't think every single one of those scenes was necessary, and the film lost me for a little bit until Oppie says Hitler's dead, and it starts gripping me once again. And on rewatch, while the last hour of the film is absolutely fantastic, it also probably could have been the last 45 minutes or so instead. After a while, you get the idea with this hearing, and there's only so many ways these guys can ask, "Are you a communist, Oppenheimer? Are ya?" It's a little repetitive, but to be fair, that's kind of representative of McCarthyism. Just this cyclical, never-ending witch hunt that only has one outcome. Well, despite my minor gripes with it, I do think this is an amazing film, and perhaps Christopher Nolan's most culturally significant work to date. Right up there with The Dark Knight. Again, you can attribute some of that significance to Barbenheimer, one of the coolest cinematic events I've ever been alive for. But now that that dust has settled and we've started to judge Barbie and Oppenheimer on their individual merits, I think the sheer weight and power of Oppenheimer cannot be overstated. This will be one of Nolan's most iconic pieces of art for years to come, and I'm so intrigued to see what he could possibly follow this up with. Don't you just love it when you watch a critically acclaimed and iconic movie for the first time, and then it just completely lives up to the hype you've been hearing about it for years? Memento is everything I hoped it would be and more. All I knew about it was the fact that the scenes play in reverse order. Ooh, that Christopher Nolan, he's such a scamp when it comes to playing with time. On paper, it seems like this would remove suspense from the story, since you see its outcome in the very first scene. Spoilers for the first 5 minutes of Memento, he shoots the guy. We know where everything's headed, and yet, you can't help but wonder how we got here. And you can't help but suspect there's something darker underneath the surface here. The movie delivers pieces of its story with no indication of what leads to each piece happening. A brilliant reflection of the protagonist's short-term memory loss. It also makes for a story that engaged me the whole way through, since every single scene made me ask, what happened before this? I gotta know! Combining the non-chronological events with the chronological story Leonard tells is an excellent touch too. It provides necessary breaks from the reverse plotline, making each of those segments sink in for a bit. And it's also compelling in its own right. I didn't necessarily know how it tied into everything else going on, but then it all came together in one of the most truly insane reveals I've seen in some time. I won't dare spoil it if, like me, you haven't seen this film yet and don't know much about it. It's just so strong, so consistently gripping the entire time, even before the mind-blowing ending ties everything together. I really love the performances of Guy Pearce and Guy from The Sopranos. The editing is really strong. You know me, I'm a sucker for good editing. And aside from the sheer visceral thrill of piecing the story together, I found Leonard's inability to cope with his affliction so fascinating and tragic. His refusal to do anything else with his new life is just so f***ed up. Man, it is so hard to talk about this movie without spoiling anything, but if you've seen it, I think you know what I mean. Bottom line is, I'm just in awe of it. Its concept, its tone, its themes, everything just comes together to make the exceptional sophomore effort that put Christopher Nolan on the map. Watch it, it's peak. Alright, let's cut the shit. You know exactly what number 1 is. It's the damn Dark Knight. Perhaps the single most iconic and influential movie of the 2000s. Some of you might be a little too young to remember this, but when this movie came out, the world went nuts. It was everywhere. Everyone, young and old, casual viewer and cinephile alike, was obsessed with this movie and completely in awe of how good it was. We were talking about it, quoting a ton of the Joker's dialogue, especially why so serious. And I even distinctly remember finding a video that takes the Dark Knight trailer audio and puts Monsters Inc. footage over it.
Let's put a smile on that face.
But someone else made that. How did I react? I was 10 when this came out, and I think this was the first great new film I ever saw that wasn't just an animated Pixar or DreamWorks movie. This was the first film that made me say, wow, now that was a movie. I was obsessed with it. You better believe I dressed up as Batman that Halloween. When I got an assignment in my middle school digital media class to film a recreation of a movie scene, you better believe I would film an embarrassing remake of the Joker pencil scene, using random stuffed animals I had laying around. When I started to get into acting during my middle school plays, I would recite a ton of the Joker's monologues in this film, just to practice getting into a character. This movie had a hold on me. But when it comes to this list, I wasn't ready to just hand it the #1 spot and call it a day. I thought this and Inception were gonna be the top 2 based on my childhood feelings that they were just perfect movies. But upon rewatch with my adult sensibilities, I didn't like Inception quite as much as I remembered. But this movie? Nah man, this earns the #1 spot. It's kind of unreal how much almost everything here holds up from an adult perspective. Nolan made a movie that could feasibly be someone's favorite film of all time when they're a child, and then have it remain their favorite film of all time throughout their entire life. That's how good it is. Okay, I'll be fair though, no movie is perfect, and I think the consistently worst thing about this film is the fucking Christian Bale Batman voice. We know it, we love to make fun of it, it's just really bad. It kind of works if you view Batman as just this insane menace who beats the shit out of people, but if you ignore the Bruce Wayne persona, it's kind of impossible to endear yourself to a protagonist who sounds like this all the time. Where are they? But the reason I don't think that's a major issue is because this isn't really Batman's movie. But we'll get to that in a bit. First, let me air my other issue out. I don't really like how the use of mass surveillance in the end to catch the Joker goes uncritiqued in the narrative. I don't mean in the sense that I needed a character to straight up say, this is wrong, so the audience gets it. Because that's actually in the film.
This is wrong.
No, obviously it's a pretty immoral thing to do, and Lucius acknowledges that. But the thing is, it works. Batman uses it effectively to catch the Joker. And I don't know how I feel about the narrative not really presenting a downside to the use of this technology. You could say that Batman goes into exile after this, but that's not because of this crime. It's because he's taking the fall for Dent's crimes. I'm just not really sure what Nolan was trying to say with the effective use of something so similar to a certain controversial American political act. But I suppose Oppenheimer is indicative of his political maturity nowadays, so I guess it's fair to not fixate too much on this portion of the film. Okay, now to explain why The Dark Knight is peak. Simply put, this film does not let up. It's such a masterful crime thriller in the sense that there's no downtime. That's not to say it's all non-stop action and suspense. The characters do get chances to reflect on what's going on. But the thing is, you just never feel safe watching this movie. You never get to fully catch your breath after any of the Joker's insane schemes, because it's never too long before he's on to the next one. The way the film is structured makes it consistently engaging throughout its entire runtime. I genuinely will never understand how some people will claim that this movie is boring whenever the Joker isn't on screen. Like, did you just sleep through most of the movie or what? It's so fascinating seeing people's response to relentless terrorism and watching their ethical boundaries get pushed further and further. Watching Harvey Dent consistently get propped up as a status symbol, only for this plan to come crashing down once he gives into his urge for revenge, is intense and engrossing. I love how Nolan can take a character as inherently silly as Two-Face and make him work in a realistic setting by applying compelling commentary on morality to him. I love how the noble lie Batman chooses to adopt at the end in order to protect Dent's reputation is directly paralleled by Alfred choosing not to tell him the truth about Rachel's intentions. The scene where Rachel gets blowed up is so intense as you see her accept in that moment that she's gonna die, even though Bruce was trying to rescue her. Like, damn. I know I said I really liked Katie Holmes in this role, but like, Maggie Gyllenhaal is just objectively better, I gotta admit. I love all the excellent quotes that have reverberated in pop culture. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Some men just want to watch the world burn. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. This movie doesn't exactly have the densest themes or messages. They're pretty simple and yet insanely effective. This was one of the first times a comic book movie really felt like it was saying something about the state of the world, and it's so gripping as a result. But with all that said, yeah, we gotta talk about the star of the show here. I think it's fair to say that Heath Ledger as the Joker is the single most iconic performance of the 21st century so far. Something really shifted with this performance. Everyone was just blown away by how thoroughly he embodied this conniving, chaotic clown. And it's honestly on the level where I look at him and I don't even see a performance. Like, that's just the Joker, man. He completely disappears into the character and makes him seem like this unstoppable force of nature. He can't be reasoned with, he just wants to watch the world burn, etc., etc. I just love the fact that he has no history in this universe. No former identity or origin whatsoever. It's like he just spawned into existence one day to psychologically torment whoever he feels like. The image of him is effortlessly terrifying, and yet he's just so funny at the same time. It's a very different interpretation of the Joker than usual, but they get his essence so right. There's really nothing I can say about this performance that hasn't already been said. Like, it's the Joker, baby! You know just how incredible and how influential this performance is. And like, honestly, what else can I really say about the movie? It stood the test of time as one of the most beloved and talked about films in recent memory. Sorry if I sound like a normie for saying Nolan hasn't topped this one, but that's just how I feel. He hasn't. This is my favorite live-action comic book movie and my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. So, that's my list. Anyway, to summarize, Christopher Nolan is pretty cool. He makes awesome movies. They're smart and stuff, but also they have a lot of action and they're epic. No, but seriously, I really am impressed with how thoroughly he manages to grip general audiences everywhere, with more intelligent films than the average blockbuster. A lot of smart movies with interesting themes continue to come out, but your average moviegoer probably doesn't go see them. So it's nice to have at least one popular filmmaker who manages to put out thought-provoking work. Most of his movies aren't the deepest thing in the world, but they're a good gateway for people to get interested in deeper stuff, while also being pretty excellent films in their own right. I hope Nolan keeps doing what he's doing, and I'm really excited to see what comes next for him. That's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Well, actually, there is one thing that's kind of been nagging at me for months now. You see, in Oppenheimer, we see Einstein at 3 different points in time. The first point in time, at the beginning, but also the ending of the movie, he has a silly hat on. It even blows off in the wind. That's cute. The second point in time, when Oppie first asks him about those calculations, he's also wearing an even sillier hat. Nice. But the third time we see him, when he gets out of that one car, he's not wearing a hat. Guys, you don't understand. He can't just not be wearing a hat. He's Einstein. That's his thing. Alongside E=mc², and the time an apple fell on him and he invented gravity. The fact that Christopher Nolan has the gall to depict this man without a silly hat in one of these scenes is just obscene. What is his problem? Did you steal this hat off of Einstein's head, you asshole? I bet you did. Or maybe this scene was depicting Einstein before he got into silly hats. In which case, how was I supposed to know that? You've gone too far with your non-linear storytelling this time, you hack! You need to answer for this crime against cinema. And if no one else is gonna make you do that, I will. So, to conclude this video, it's time to take you to court. Mr. Nolan, you stand here accused of not only theft, but wasting away the audience's goodwill with aspects of your confusing, non-linear time progression. How do you plead? Not talking, huh? That makes sense since you're just a PNG of his head. Very well. Until you can atone for your transgressions, I sentence you to director jail. You shall never work again due to the consequences of your previous film's failure. Take him away.
Are you watching closely?
Wait, did that disembodied PNG head just speak? Ooh, a map to treasure. Everybody wait here while I go pursue this.
A few inches later.
Alright, let's see what I can find. Huh? It can't be. That madman! What has he done? He He made a bunch of silly hats for Einstein. Not giving him one in that scene was just a misdirect. Oh my god, Nolan, you genius! I'm sorry I ever doubted your brilliant method of storytelling. Forget director's jail. From now on, you can make anything you want as your next film. Go ahead, pitch me anything. You know what, that's on me. I should have set some boundaries. Good night, Tri-State Area.
Howdy everybody. So, I wanted to interrupt for a second because I wanted to talk about something related to Memento. It doesn't have to do with the movie itself, but it has something to do with one of its physical releases, which I think has to be one of the coolest DVDs I've ever seen, and I think you all need to know about it. That, of course, being the Special Limited Edition. First things first, I really want to talk about how this thing is packaged. It's supposed to look like a case file for Leonard's Expedition, and I think that's just a brilliant way to design it. They went all out with this, and I gotta give them props for that. Not only just for the packaging, it just gets even better with its discs, because when you put them in, you're in for something completely bizarre and unlike any other DVD for any other film. This might be one of the most strangest, but yet creative DVD menus I've ever seen. I could go on about its menus and how to guide through them because it is kind of a bit complicated, especially for disc 2. But if you are curious, there is a, oh good lord, 47-minute walkthrough video of this limited edition, and most of it has to go with disc 2 because that's where the bonus features kick in. If you're ever wanting to own Memento physically, I highly recommend buying this DVD. I think it has to be one of the best visual releases of Memento ever, at least DVD-wise, and just one of the best DVDs ever. It's one of the biggest prime reasons why I love Memento and why it means so much to me, and what it's given to me. Alright, I think I'm done rambling here. I'm gonna let James wrap up this ranking, and I'm gonna head off to play Xenogears, baby! Woo!